Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Potawatomi Casino Hotel Milwaukee, home to 24/7 excitement, dining, and an on-site hotel at 1721 West Canal Street. More information at potawatomi.com.
Okay, a couple things. Do you happen to have the naturalization card? Did you have that on your phone still?
Okay. I have it right here.
You have the actual card?
I printed it out.
This is my dad, Michael Gutierrez. I didn't expect to do this story with you, but then you sent me the naturalization card, which is wild to think about that we have record of our family being naturalized in this country, but then also that it lands 100 years ago.
Yeah.
This card belongs to my dad's grandpa and my great-grandpa, Ramon Serrano, who came to the U.S. from Mexico 100 years ago on June 3rd, 1926. This card is basically proof of citizenship for immigrants, foreign nationals, and it includes a bunch of personal information.
The first thing that always hits me is that our color is considered white. And Ramon, being indigenous, I'm probably saying this incorrectly, but it was the Chichimeca tribe back then in that area, vicinity of Irapuato in the state of Guanajuato, because he was dark. He was very, very dark.
Mm-hmm. We could do a whole episode on this, but basically, citizenship at the time was reserved for white folks or those of African descent. But looking at this card, it's my first time seeing it too, and I'm learning a ton about Ramon. Like how tall he was. He was 5'3".
Yeah.
So
yeah, but
so we got his height.
Yeah, but he was always a big man to me.
How so?
His tenderness taught not just me but my cousins, to grandma, my mom, and his sons, and his other two daughters. And also when he would come, when he was working for the Chicago Northwestern Railroad, he was driving a maintenance car. And he'd toot the horn when he knew I was home. And he had a special toot. It was two short, one long, one short.
Wait, what did that sound like?
Toot, 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 toot. And I would run out of the house. And so it was a hill that I'd have to climb up to get onto the tracks. So I'm always looking up, here I come, you know. I never knew he was 5'3" until I saw this.
This card helped fill in a lot of questions I had about my family and our migration journey, where they lived in Mexico, and the exact date and location where Ramon crossed into the U.S.
Some of these cities didn't exist until after the border was established. They exist because the border was established.
This is Dr. Carolina Monsivais. She's an assistant professor at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, and she studied the borderlands around the time that my great-grandfather immigrated, and the port of entry he came in through in Laredo.
Laredo is actually from the late 18th century. That's an old Texas city. And Nuevo Laredo was something that emerged after 1848 as a way to be that counterpart.
Some quick and incomplete history. The border was formally established with the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo after the Mexican-American War. And this border, this imaginary line, a line that people used to freely cross back and forth, soon became violent. A way to deter people from coming into the land that had always been theirs.
There were different ports of entry that were also very tied into the eugenics movement. And so they were also focused on this idea of people being disease-ridden. So there are certain ports of entry in like El Paso and Juarez, for instance, that established what they call disinfection centers. So people had to come into these centers more often than not stripped down. They were often sprayed, deloused with chemicals, and their clothes were put through ovens.
This dousing wasn't happening by doctors, but border enforcement agents. And this is about the time that my great-grandfather Ramon enters the U.S. I'm Jimmy Gutierrez, and this is Status Pending. In the last episode, we talked about the 250th anniversary of the U.S. and our immigration story through the lens of Indigenous and Black history. Today, we're looking at our immigration history from 100 years ago, specifically at the southern border, when so many Mexicans and others started to migrate north for the promise of a better life. What waited for people at this new border? And what did it take to fulfill the promise of a new America? There are stories I've heard about mi bisabuelo Ramon Serrano from my dad. I even have a few treasured pictures of him. I knew he was indigenous and tall in character, but I didn't know that he was the first in the Serrano family to come over.
So he entered first to start the process rolling for his wife and his firstborn.
His son Raymond was born a year earlier in 1925.
Because they, as a family, entered the United States in 1927. And that was typical, somebody goes first and gets everything all situated for the family to come over.
At the time that he was coming, he likely would have had to go just to enter the United States, he probably had to go through the consulate, like the embassy. It makes sense that he would have gone through a major port, Laredo, and maybe initially, he did some agricultural work.
Ramon spent a year in Laredo before moving to Milwaukee with the family, and Carolina was spot on.
When he first found work, it was working on the farms. And then he also found work working on the railroads in Texas.
I knew Ramon was from Irapuato, had no formal education, and coming over for work was the only option that he had to provide something better for our family. But what drove other Mexicans? Carolina says there were a bunch of different reasons at the time. First of all, at the turn of the 20th century, Mexican President Porfirio Diaz modernized the country. This was kind of his thing, order and progress. The country built railways, relationships with foreign nations, developed major metro hubs, but it also brought with it profound poverty to a working class that was already struggling. Then a few years later, the Mexican Revolution breaks out.
Over that 10-year period, about 1 million Mexicans enter the United States, fleeing the violence. The flip side to that, though, is that industrialists and growers become heavily dependent on Mexican labor, and they want that labor to continue coming into the United States.
They wanted that labor so much so, they sent recruiters into Mexico, possibly Irapuato, possibly with promises to my great-grandfather Ramon.
Enganchadores is what they call them, that went into central Mexico looking for workers. So that could have been something that somebody just came and he was recruited to come work in the United States. That's a possibility.
While politicians had a real problem with this boom in immigration, which we're getting to, I promise, the capitalists and industrialists loved Mexican labor.
And some of the arguments that they make is that Mexicans are better suited for this work because they're hard workers, they're humble, they're low to the ground. Of course, none of this is scientifically based. These are just things that they said at the time.
Wait, low to the ground?
Low to the ground, compliant, so they're used to back-breaking work.
What was it like for him to go through this process to get naturalized in the first place? It feels like he's in the midst of a lot of change when it comes to the borderlands.
Well, there are many factors that can contribute. So I'm looking at it now, if he was working on the railroad, that would make it easier for him to do that, because this was a very powerful corporation. What I always found interesting about railway workers is that these corporations were much more interested in having a stable workforce.
Railroads and railways were one of the few industries at the time that wanted permanent workers, even encouraging the men to bring their families over. But not everyone felt this way. Most industries loved the fact that workers came here part-time, made their money, and went back to Mexico. The idea of immigrants coming to the U.S. and staying has always been a problem for some. After World War I, President Woodrow Wilson was the first to militarize the border, sending troops to patrol. Carolina says he was also the first to weaponize the borderlands terrain.
Deter traffic into areas that were more difficult to cross, like the desert or mountains. So they could actually use the natural terrain as a way to deter people from coming into the United States.
A few years later comes more big changes.
The immigration law of 1924 is intended to not only increase these requirements that they are establishing at ports of entry, but they want to place quotas on these countries.
At the time, besides Mexicans, the U.S. was worried about European immigrants who would come into Mexico and try to enter the same southern ports of entry, like Laredo and El Paso.
This category of illegal alien is created, though many people who are coming in are not actually are not Mexican. They're actually coming from other places that were placed under this quota system.
Immigration from Asia was also essentially banned. And pretty importantly, this is when the Border Patrol was created. A few years later, in 1929, the Undesirable Aliens Act is passed.
And so what this did for the first time was to criminalize crossing over the U.S.-Mexico border if they were not entering through a legal port of entry. So for the first time, it made something that Mexicans and Mexican Americans had done regularly a crime.
When it comes to labor, there's always been this push and pull of being dependent on immigrant labor while also criminalizing certain types of immigration. But 100 years ago, the country was up to its knees with think tanks, politicians, and media peddling narratives about immigration that we're really familiar with today.
One thing that they pretty commonly would say was that this population cannot assimilate into the United States. They don't hold the same values. They come from countries that don't understand democracy. Maybe they're radicals.
It's such a common argument that we still hear today.
Right. Well, you'll like this part then because they are also more prone to violence.
Mm-hmm.
And they commit more crimes. They're disease-ridden, and they take jobs from Americans.
Not everyone made it across like my great-grandfather Ramon. And if they did, they might not have been able to stay. Carolina studies the border and its arrest records. Tons of people were detained at this time. Others, like we heard, were subjected to chemical baths. The border, this very new, invisible line, was now filled not just with potential, but with consequences. It's hard enough to find these histories when we think about what is U.S. history. And, we're not talking about the 1600s or 1776. We're talking 100 years ago. It's so hard to find these histories and these stories of immigration, not just from the U.S., but even in our own families. And I just wanted to ask you, what can we learn about ourselves by digging into this history and understanding this history?
Well, it is a very U.S. story. It is a story of the history of the United States, and it's very often omitted from the overall history of the country. And what that does is omit, millions of people who helped build this country. So not just the Southwest, although I would say Mexicans and Mexican Americans had a great part in building much of the Southwest, but also many of the industries in the United States.
What do you remember about your grandpa, not as a grandpa, but as a man?
Well respected by the community, by the Mexican community. I don't recall anyone not calling him Don Ramon, both men and women. Part of it was I know, that he came to work here in Milwaukee as a laborer for Chicago Northwestern. This guy with no formal education, very poor English, he worked his way up to assistant foreman in one of the biggest railroads in the United States. Then he not only owned his own home, he was able to purchase, and with no loan, a duplex, so he had additional income coming in from families who lived above them.
Was that on
that was on 8th Street?
Okay,
yeah.
8th and Washington.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
My dad told me about the mutual aid that existed in Milwaukee at the time. The way Don Ramon helped folks pay their rent if they were short or buy groceries. It was the same way that he was taken care of when he first got to Milwaukee with his wife Augustina and their son Raymond.
The Mexican community was a true community. And it doesn't matter if let's say your name is Lopez and I'm a Gutierrez, right? And I've just known you for maybe not even a year, and I find out that, you're short of cash, you're short of...
Can't pay your rents.
Right,
maybe getting
right.
put out with your family.
Right. Then I'm going to help you. And he'd helped a lot of people. Mm-hmm.
Don Ramon.
Don Ramon.
How do you think his life and who he was as an immigrant impacted you?
Oh, it instilled in me a sense of pride of being a Mexican American. Both grandfathers, both your great-grandfathers, were hard workers. And although they were domestic housewives, both your great-grandmothers were hard workers. And then again, Grandma Gutierrez, my mom, your grandma, she was like a trailblazer as far as a woman, working in the late 50s and the 60s, having her own job.
She was working in high school.
Yeah, she was working in high
She
school.
lied about her age to get those jobs.
Yeah. So, and then I saw, my dad, your grandpa, first a tannery, then a body shop. He was never without employment. I figured, I got an obligation here. Although my name is Gutierrez, half of me is Serrano, right? When I finally grew up and stopped being a clown, it made me realize, hey, I've got an obligation to continue the tradition of both sides of the families. Not to sound corny, but to do the best that I can and even go above and beyond. And I see you doing that too.
I do think about this sometimes, especially with like this podcast and the show and stories like this. I'm like, would Grandpa and Grandma be proud of me?
Oh, I know they would.
I know. Like, would they hear something like this and be happy that we're like expanding these conversations about immigration or our family history? Because our family history is the American story.
Right.
Like, this is...
You don't know this, but what makes me so proud of you is that you're the voice that not Ramon or Agustina Serrano or Juan or Francis Gutierrez had. You're their voice.
Yeah, I don't think I'm ready to think about that.
That's the truth.
I think that's almost too much for me.
I think that we also need to remember that in our own homes, we do have histories that we can ourselves uncover, whether that's in photographs or, old home movies, things like that. And when we begin to piece those lives together, we're also piecing the history of this country together. And I think that that's really important overall for all of us to see and understand.
That was Dr. Carolina Monsiváis, assistant professor at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, and my dad, Michael Gutierrez. Today's episode was produced by me, Jimmy Gutierrez, and edited by Emily Files. Status Pending is produced by WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, part of the NPR network. In 2 weeks, we are continuing our series looking into the immigration history of the U.S. as we dig into the 50-year mark. What did immigration look like 50 years ago? And how are we still wrestling with the changes from that time? Thank you so much for listening. Subscribe to Status Pending for more stories about immigration in Wisconsin and beyond.